Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Sage again on this lovely sunny day. Just before I kick off this afternoon's programme and introduce you to Annick, I've been asked to mention the talk that's on the Bushy Shaw Zoom site tomorrow night. Dr. Ephraim Zuroff, who is the director of Simon Wiesenthal Centre office in Jerusalem. He's giving a talk called My Life as a Nazi Hunter, and that's at 7:30 tomorrow evening for those of you who would like to join that. Okay, so welcome this afternoon and welcome to Annick. Annick's talk is titled Women's Experience in the Holocaust. We're going to hear about the life of Annick Lever from the time she was 2 months old. Her mother was taken by the Nazis and shot. Annick was saved as a baby by a French family, and she did not find out she was Jewish until she became a teenager. So therein, I'm sure, lies quite a story. So Annick, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to address you. I hope you do understand me. As you already know, my name is Annick. I was born in France during the last World War and grew up there. When I was about 11, that was quite the war was already ended. I went out with a friend one late afternoon to go and buy some milk. And as I was walking, the next thing I knew, I had a rope around my neck, and there were some young boys pulling the rope and calling me dirty Jew. I have to tell you, I had no idea what they meant because I didn't know I was Jewish. So the story I'm about to tell you, actually part of it anyway, it was when I was when I was a baby, so it's not from memory. I've heard it so many times that I feel I could almost remember. I had a very odd habit as a child. I used to fall asleep on the table after the meal, and I could hear the adults talk about my story, and that's how I heard it so many times. That's how I really know it in so much details. Let me first of all introduce you to the family. Now, my grandfather was born in Belgium, my grandmother in Holland, and the grandmother actually was quite a formidable lady. She was, I was told, a first woman, a first girl to go to university in Rotterdam. In those days, it was not called university, it was a high economic school of Rotterdam. Now it is a university. And they had 3 daughters. And when my first aunt was born, they lived then in Belgium, and my first aunt was born, they moved to Paris. My other aunt and my mother were both born in Paris. And they all acquired French nationality in 1931. In the summer of 1939, they came to the southwest of France. Sadly enough, war was declared and they were never able to go back to their apartment in Paris. Only the grandfather did go back to pick up a few things, but that was it. Now, my eldest aunt was already married, and she married a Dutchman, and she was living in Amsterdam at the time war was declared, and they had 2 children, and the whole family was very concerned about them, because in Holland things were very bad at that time, even worse than in France. And I found out, I know a lot of little stories about that, because quite a long time ago now, but I was already married, my Dutch aunt gave me some diaries which belonged to my mother, and that was diaries from the last 3 years of her life. So I have quite a few details on it. In fact, at one time, as I was reading it, some very odd little coincidences. One of them is when my mother fell pregnant, my father wanted a boy, and they wanted to call him Alain. And maybe most of you do not know me there, but believe it or not, my husband is called Alan. And I had not read those diaries when we got married, which I found was a very odd coincidence. Anyway, to carry on with the story, when they arrived, when I say to you, they came down to the southwest of France in September, just before the war was declared. They said they were coming on holidays. I don't know if it was really holidays, but anyway, at that time, my aunt was 22 and my mother was 20. And I've been told many a time that they were two very beautiful women. And it was not very long before they both found husbands. Now, both my uncle, my father were not Jewish. The grandparents were not very keen on the idea, but because of what was going on, they let their daughters get married, outside their religion. So they both women married. My aunt had a daughter who was born in January 1943, and then I was born in November 1943. Not quite the boy my father expected, but here you are. He had no choice. Now, to tell you a little bit about their life, just before I was born, actually, in 1940, as I say, they were already in southwest of France. Life became very difficult for the Jewish population in France. My grandfather had to go in October, had to go and register at the town hall. And then he had to go back in December to declare whatever they possessed, which by then was not much left because everything had been taken. And then in May 1941, he had to go back with all the identity cards. I'm sure you're all aware that in France, we all have an identity card. And he had to take the identity cards to the town hall because they all had to be stamped with the word Juif across it. And then on the 7th of June, 1942, the misery just carried on, came something which you all know about. From the age of 7, you were to wear a yellow star. If you went outside without it, as you must have heard, there was trouble. Not only did they have to wear those yellow stars, but they had to buy them themselves. They had to have two, and they paid for them with their textile coupons, because in France, and already at that time, everything was bought with coupons. Then in July 1942, they imposed a curfew, which meant that you had to be home by 1930. Otherwise, they came back and see what was going on. And then came January 1943. On the 30th of January 1943, all the Jewish people living by the sea had to move. They were not allowed to stay there. And so my father, who was from the region, had an uncle who lived in a little town, village town, about 40 kilometers from the seaside. So the whole family moved there. My parents went to live with the uncle and the aunt, and the grandparents and the other aunt had rented accommodation. Actually, I was born in that little village, in the house of this aunt and uncle. Their life was not very happy there. First of all, they were very worried what was going on in Holland with the other aunt. and they knew that things were getting worse, everywhere really. For war was developing more and more, and all the Nazis were in France, and Pétain had joined as you know, Marshal Pétain was working with Hitler, so things were really very bad. They were very concerned. Now, on the 30th of January 1944, the family was invited, some friends. My father, of course, had quite a few friends, and my family, my grandparents became also friends with them, and they were invited. The house in Saint, I don't know if any of you know the area, but they went to, those people were living in Saint, and they went to spend the day with them. And for them, it was, in a way, it was a relief, because there were other people there, and it was a day out of their routine. And I'm sure right now you must understand that they were wonderful to be with other people. As it happened, when they were there, they were very, very good friends of my father. And my mother had a premonition that somehow something was about to happen. And she asked this friend, she said, if anything was to happen, would you look after Annick? And this friend, of course, said, of course, but no, don't talk like that. Nothing is happening for the moment. Anyway, the evening came, and they were ready to go home. But unfortunately, the car would not start. And they were so worried, because they were, my cousin, who was a year old, and myself, 2 months, they wanted to get back to their home. Eventually, the car started. It was activated, as you see on the picture, by a gas, I can't remember the name now, a wood burner, because petrol was very scarce in those days. And it was really destiny, because they were so eager to go back. And believe it or not, when they arrived, it was almost midnight already, past the curfew. And the police was there waiting for them to arrest all of us. When I say them, I was, of course, part of it. My father managed to talk the police on leaving us for the night. And they agreed, they left somebody there to guard us. And they came back to collect us all the next morning. I was told that they were allowed to carry a little suitcase with them. That my mother, I understand, put a lot of clothing on, dress one on top of the other, that she would have something with her. They had no idea where they were going, really. They knew just that they were taken away. And the other thing is, although they said they would have left the children behind, of course, they had to take us with them. So my little cousin, myself, we all went with them to a big town, the bigger town of the area, which is called La Rochelle. And there we were taken to a school which had been transformed into a prison. And as soon as that happened, my father, well, of course, I think they went to research if my father had any Jewish blood, because they couldn't find anything. He was released, and he straight away went off to a friend and to tell them what had happened. The friends my mother had asked to look after me. So he went back to those friends. They all came back to the prison. The friend, the lady, her husband, my father, all back to La Rochelle, because they were living in a little town called Saujon. It's not marked on the map there. That's actually next to Royan. That's really where I grew up. So they all went back to the prison. They were able to get in. I understand they were guarded actually by French police. They were also Nazi soldiers there as well. But they went in, and they convinced my aunt and my mother to give the children. So, and as they were doing that, there was another lady there who who could hear what was going on. So she came to the friend of my parents, and she said to that lady, she said, I know what you are doing. Please, you must also take my 2 children. And the friend said, I can't. I'm taking those 2 because their father, are outside, but I can't take your children. And sorry, I always get a bit emotional, but this lady said to the friend, she said, if you had the heart of a mother, you would not refuse. What she didn't know is this lady had only in May, we were now in January, in May, she had lost an 11-month-old baby. So this friend was not able to refuse. So they left the prison with those 2 other children. There was a boy who was 11 and a girl who was 7. And my cousin was a year and myself 2 months old. How they managed to get out, we don't know. I was told I was wrapped up in blankets. They were very worried that I would start crying, but they managed to smuggle us out of, outside the prison. And then we were taken, we drove to the friend's house in Saujon. And the same evening, there was a knock on the door. The friend went to open, and there was the police saying that they knew that she had children with her who didn't belong to her. And she said, well, I don't know what you're talking about because they're little cousins. I'm looking after them. And police say, we know they are not cousins. So unless you bring them back, we will have to arrest you and your children. This friend had 2 other children, a boy and a girl. And I've heard that story many times, that it was a very, very bad night for everybody because they didn't know what to do. The little boy, the 11 years old, was begging them not to take them back. And what do you do when you have another two children to protect? It was a very difficult situation. Anyway, at the end, they thought that they just had to take those 2 children back. So the friends, the husband of the friend and my father drove those 2 children back to La Rochelle, where actually the train was waiting for them in the station, because they were taken, everybody was then being taken to a transit camp, the other side of Paris. And I must tell you straight away, actually, that those 2 children, their mother, and eventually the father, who was a prisoner of war, as it happened, all survived. I met them after the war. We were all friends. They were tailors. They even made my outfit when I got engaged. So we, they were still very grateful to Mimi to have tried to take to protect their children. And anyway, their story ended up very well. But to carry on with my side of the story, as I, told you, they all were taken to that transit camp in Paris. What I should have mentioned to you before is when they were still in that prison in La Rochelle, in that school, my father had managed to bribe somebody to leave a door open. My father was part of the resistance, and he also had some false identity card made for my mother and my aunt. So they both managed to get out of the prison and went off, I'm told, but then eventually they came back because they could not leave their parents. They were very close family, very attached to their parents. And I think my grandmother was so affected, she was starting to lose her head, and they just couldn't leave their parents. So they went back in. Little did they know what was ahead of them. Anyway, they went, as I say, they went to that transit camp in Paris. And then I think it was on the 10th of, I'm just trying to, yes, the 10th of February, they were all put in cattle wagons to be taken on transport 68 to be taken to Auschwitz. Now, I had heard again for many, many years that my grandparents' name, my aunt's name could be seen in Auschwitz, but for some reasons, they couldn't find my mother. But since then, I'm in touch with a very big college in France, and they go to Auschwitz every year. And I asked, when I spoke to them, I asked them to look out for my mother's name, and they did find it. You know, my mother was, her name, my maiden name was Xavier, and as you can see, that was Liliane Xavier. What happened with my mother, and believe it or not, I discovered only quite just a few years ago, but I had been told quite a long time ago that after the war, a lady came to look for the family in Paris, because they were quite, my grandfather had a lot of brothers and sisters, and they had all left Belgium. They were all living in Paris, very close. And this lady came to look for the family, and she found some members of the family. And she then told them that she had herself traveled in the same transport 68 with my family. And at that time, but I was then not told, I only discovered that, as I said, just a few years ago, that one of the sisters had been shot on the way, and that was my mother. I understand that my mother lost her mind because she was breastfeeding me. She had a lot of milk. Remember, I was only 2 months old, so she hadn't been able to feed me because, of course, I had been taken, rescued. And she developed milk fever. And we don't know why, and I will never find out, but she was shot just before arriving at Auschwitz. So that is really what happened, my mother and the rest of that family. Now, for me, all I told you up to now, as you can understand, I don't quite remember because of my age, 2 months. But now I'm going to talk a part of the story I really remember. Now, this lady who my mother had asked to take care of me, I called her Mimi, because all her grandchildren called her Mimi. She was a wonderful woman. She really gave me love, and I adored her. She's now passed away. She was a real mother to me. And I used to tell people, I used to call her mother. My mother had asked that I would never call anybody else mother. But she had her, as I told you, her 2 other children were a lot older than me. I called them my sister and brother, but now they're not real sister and brother, of course. But my sister was, at that time, she was 10 going on 11, and the brother was 9. And they, of course, called me mother. So one day, apparently, she was dressing me, and I said to her, I used to call her godmother, because she was my godmother. I should tell you, actually, I should have mentioned before, that when I was taken out of the prison, for me not to be sent back, I had to be Christian. And they had to send the papers, once it was done, to the commandantur in La Rochelle. And so that's what happened. So this lady, Mimi, was my godmother. And I said to her then, at that time, she was dressing me, "You're not my godmother, you're my mommy." And she then afterwards asked my father if, you know, what would happen, because I was calling her Mommy. My father said, what will be the difference? So I ended up calling her, you know, Mommy, mother, except to make the difference with my real mother now, because I think about her a lot more nowadays. I call her Mimi, like her grandchildren refer to her as Mimi. Now, Mimi, a husband I used to call uncle. He was very nice to me as well. And I used to tell people when I was a little girl that my mommy slept with my uncle. So you can, that, you know, if people didn't know my story, they used to find that a little bit strange. Anyway, between the, you know, Mimi and her husband, the marriage deteriorated when I was a child. Some reason he started drinking and things were quite bad. And one day he came back home in the evening. I was 6 years old, and he had a rifle and he wanted to kill Mimi. And I put myself between the two of them. 6 had went round Mimi's, you know, I was holding Mimi. And I said to him, you will not kill my mommy. And he said, as I said, he was very nice to me. And he pushed me away with a rifle. And he said, it was the first time I heard it, she's not your mother anyway. And at 6, I was very shocked by that. Never asked anything, but I became quite ill, actually. I had a, you know, because of all the whole incident, I had jaundice from fear, and never asked why he said that she was not my mother. I never asked. Like when that boy put that rope around my neck, why is it? I came back home and I never said anything, never asked any question. I mean, in my bedroom, there was the picture of my mother and my aunt, and Mimi used to go there. Remember once I was ill, I was in bed, and she was dusting those 2 pictures for quite a long time. I'm sure she wanted me to ask. I never asked anything, never. I don't know. I think I feared to know the truth. I was worried maybe my world would go all upside down, because I was alone with Mimi now, and I don't know why I didn't ask. I would like to know actually why I never did. Anyway, life, you know, went on, and then eventually when I was 17 years old, I got a letter from Holland. It was a letter from the family there, from my aunt. They had all survived the war. They have themselves quite a story to tell as well. They were hiding not very far from Anne Frank, as it happened. My uncle and my aunt were living under a staircase. They only went out at night. My aunt lost all her hair, so that because for 2 years they lived under that staircase. And then their children, I had a cousin, the boy, who was also, I think at the time he was 9 going on 10, and their daughter, who was then only a little girl, Hélène, she was, I think she was 4, they were taken and hidden in Holland. So at the end of the war, they all found each other again. In fact, there's a little anecdote I would tell you about my family there, that at one time the SS came to arrest them, and they knocked at the door. My uncle went to open the door, and there were three SS standing there, quite young actually, to come and arrest them. And that was in Amsterdam. And my uncle took one of them, the one who was in charge, said to him, please come with me, and took him to my cousin's bedroom. She was fast asleep. She had very long, curly blonde hair, and she was sucking her thumb. And the officer said to my uncle, he said, I've got a little girl just like her at home. So he said, we're coming back tomorrow to arrest you. So you can imagine what happened as soon as he left. Also my uncle was part of the underground in Amsterdam. They got in touch with all his contact, and they were all, taken away and hidden. But there were bad ones and good ones everywhere, obviously. As my cousin often says, I saved the family with sucking my thumb and my blonde hair. But here you are. Anyway, this letter arrived from Amsterdam when I was 17, and they wanted to see me. They wanted to meet me. So within a few weeks, I was on a plane to Amsterdam. It was the very first time I was flying and meeting a family I had no idea existed. It was quite an event for me. They were all there waiting for me at the airport, where there was my cousin, the boy who was married. The girl also married at that time, lived in Italy. I met her later with her husband. And I arrived there on the Thursday, and on the Friday, especially after the war, as you can, well, it's not the same for everybody, but family, nobody was religious. But tradition, as you know, within Jewish household is extremely important. Friday night, we're going to have a Shabbat meal. Now, you must not forget something, that I was brought up as a Catholic. And until I went to Holland, at 17, I really had no idea I was Jewish. Nobody ever told me anything. I mean, my father only spoke to me about my mother and the rest of the family once, just before I went to Holland. He took me out for a meal, the two of us, gave me my mother's jewelry, and just, spoke to me about the family for very, very short time. I was always told it was too painful for him to talk about it. He married quite late, and they were, I think he was 38. My mother was 22 when they got married, and they were married only for 2 years. So it was very difficult. And the only thing he then told me, that my mother had asked that he would never marry again. And I have to say, he kept his promise. So he did tell me that at that time, that the only thing that my mother had asked. Anyway, back in Amsterdam on that Friday, arriving Thursday, Friday night, Shabbat meal, I am served with a wonderful smelling chicken soup. Now, being brought up Catholics, going to school in France, maybe you're not aware, although France is the state is secular, but nevertheless, in schools, anywhere, you do not have meat on a Friday. It's a tradition. So my aunt gave me the soup, and I'm there looking, wondering what to do. I had never on a Friday eaten meat before. So I'm there looking at the soup, wondering what to do. And my aunt, after a little while, she says, there's something wrong. Now, I only knew them for 24 hours. I didn't know what to say. So I said, no. I took my spoon, started to taste a bit of the soup, and it was so delicious. I finished the plate, and trust me, now I do eat my chicken soup on Friday night, but it was only started at the age of 17. Anyway, the family there thought that I had to get away from the area where, where I was brought up. So they would, I had to discover something else. And especially what they wanted most of all was for me to find out about my Jewish roots. So they found me a family in Bristol, and I ended up, they wanted me to come to Bristol. Oh yes, they wanted me to come to Bristol to find out about Jewish roots. So they found me that Jewish family, and also maybe to try to better my English. That's for you to judge now. What I ended up, came arrived in Bristol in that lovely family. Their name was Gellers. They were really wonderful people. I was not the au pair there. I was more the eldest daughter. They did everything they could for me. And they, you know, there, I arrived in August. In September was Rosh Hashanah. And they took me to shul for the very first time in my life. You can see the shul there. And I don't know how many of you know the synagogue in Bristol, but it is a very old synagogue. And you have an upstairs and downstairs. And then the balcony on the left there, at the balcony, that's where I was sitting. And then somebody came and said to me, oh, you should look down there. There's some boys down there. And sort of look, let me tell you, I turned 21 when I arrived I turned in November when I arrived in Bristol. So I was still 20. So I looked out, and at the same time, somebody else looked up, a boy looked up. And that boy is the one I was referring to a bit earlier. Alan had been married for, now I can't even remember, 43 years. So it was first time in the synagogue, and looking there, and there I saw my husband. So coincidences are really very odd. What I forgot to tell you something, which I think is quite important. That little village where I was born, after the war, they actually put the name of my family on the cenotaph with the name of the dead soldiers. As you can see there on the right-hand side, that was the name of all my family. On the right, you know, my grandfather, my aunt, my grandmother, my aunt, and my mother. And I thought that was really, really an honor. But to finish with, you know, really what happened, then I got married, and we, you know, discovered about my Jewish roots, of course, and we now have 5 granddaughters. So it was all, you know, all good at the end. I mean, it was tragic to start with, but it all ended up well. And once other things I would love to say to you that I've got, you know, a lot of the dates I gave you are so 100% accurate because, again, coincidences. There was a gentleman, he was a historian in our area who was writing a book on all the cenotaph of the area, you know, of the department. You know, I'm sure you know France is divided in departments, and it was a department of the Charente-Maritime. And this gentleman wrote a book about all the cenotaphs, and on the cenotaph where I was born, which I showed you, where of course, the names of the grandparents and, you know, everybody. And he then was able to trace my cousin. You know, I told you my cousin, she still lived in the area. She still lives at the seaside. And he traced her, went to see her, and brought with him, it was quite amazing, a lot of papers which were discovered in the loft of a police station in La Rochelle. 2 young policemen were sent to clear the loft of the police station, and were told to destroy everything they found there because they were going to do some building there. I don't know exactly what. And one of those policemen started reading there were a lot of papers there, and he started reading those papers, and he realized that maybe he shouldn't destroy that. And believe it or not, there was all the papers from the commandanture from La Rochelle, who were you know, they had kept everything. As you know, the Nazi German were very meticulous and wrote everything down. So all the paper, you know, there was the number of the transport, letters from my grandfather when he had to declare what, whatever he still had. There were so many details. It was unbelievable. So we don't have those papers now, but my cousin was able to photocopy them. That's why I have photocopy as well as of them as well. I know they are in a museum in La Rochelle now. That is quite an odd thing, actually. A lot of coincidences. I suppose that's what makes life at the end of the day. But here you are. That's my story, and I hope you followed me. I hope I was not too confusing in what I said. But if you want to know anything, please feel free to ask questions. I always really welcome questions. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Annick, thank you. That was a wonderful tour through your life story. I mean, over the last year, since we started with Sage every Tuesday, we've had a number of stories of people's experiences during the war, their parents, and their stories of both sadness, as we saw from you, and of great survival, which has been good as well. And there we see your wonderful 5 granddaughters. What an inheritance that is, what a legacy, and everything else. So they are wonderful stories, but very emotional stories. And we get that clearly, even listening to you today. Clearly, there's a degree of sadness when you recount those memories. And what an amazing story to think until you were 17, you never knew you were Jewish, and never knew the wonders of chicken soup, until you were 17.
I agree. Yeah.
But a wonderful story, and you told it so well. And can I just ask the first question? When you came to England when you were 17 to Bristol, had you been taught English in school or?
Yes, but I came to England. I didn't come, when I left Holland, I went back to France. In fact, I wanted to be a nurse anyway. I came to England when I was 20. And of course, I went to secondary school and I learned, English, but it was never, as you can hear, never my 40 languages was never my thing. But yes, I had learned English before.
Your English is wonderful. Take it from me.
No. I have to tell you something very funny. When I was with the family in Bristol, it was to laugh. I used to look at television with a dictionary, and that was sometimes very difficult.
And I'm now going to have to go off. I'm really sorry. My apologies. But I'm going to leave you in Daphne's capable hands. And thank you so much. It's been lovely meeting you. And all your group is with you. It's been lovely meeting them too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Annick, I'll add my personal thank you, because it was fascinating, and what wonderful people that helped so many people during the war. It's fantastic. On a personal note, I have 5 grandsons, and you've got 5 lovely granddaughters. So you never know. Maybe we
Who
can get them
knows?
together. Who knows? Anyway, I don't know if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask Annick.
Yes.
Go ahead.
That's Robert.
Thank you, Annick. That was really extraordinarily fascinating, difficult, and beautiful. And you spoke so well. I just wondered, your father, I don't know whether I missed anything, but it felt that I didn't know your relationship. Did you carry on seeing your father when you came to England?
Very good. Yes, I don't talk too much, but I never lived with my father. I used to see him. He used to come and see me at Mimi's house, but I never lived with him. You know, especially in those days in France, men were not very, didn't take responsibility for children. Right. So I used to see him. I adored my father, but I never grew up with him.
No, okay. No, I didn't. I was wondering about that.
Yeah. Often asked that. What about your father? Why didn't he? But he was not. He was part of my life, but he never. It was actually quite interesting, because when I wanted something and I would ask Mimi, I wanted to go somewhere and do something, she would always say, ask your father. So when my father came, I would ask my father, and my father would say, well, ask Mimi. So
Yes.
at the end, I used to take the decision myself,
Okay.
but I had that so often.
And your half brother and half sister, who I think I might have met at some point.
You know, you met the son of my sister, my nephew. I mean, they're not hard. They're not hard. They really are legally. They are nothing to me. Only I grew up with them, so I always saw them as my brother and sister.
Yes.
But legally, I was never adopted or anything.
Right.
Legally, there is, there's nothing. Yeah.
But and all the story that you've shared with us about how all of this happened to you, of course, you've learned through your family in Holland. Is that right? I mean, all that happened to you at 2 months, you wouldn't know.
No. I told you. I said to you, no, they didn't know any of that, the family in Holland, really, not as much detail. But when I was a child, Mimi used to tell the story a lot. And I never asked. So when there were people around, if we were at somebody's house for a meal,
yes.
After the meal, I had that habit of falling asleep on the table.
Right.
At the table, but sometimes I pretended to be asleep and I could hear the story.
Right.
That's how I heard it so many times but I never told that. They didn't know that I know. In fact, when I speak to with what I call my sister, if you like that, I was telling her things that she didn't even realize herself because they didn't know I was listening. That's how I discovered a lot of things.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
That's really extraordinary. Thank you so much.
Are there any other questions? Anybody else? No? No, yes. Malcolm, you need to mute yourself. Unmute yourself.
Rita speaking here. You said you had family in Belgium. Can you refer to which part of Belgium it was?
No.
Can you hear me?
Not anymore. My grandfather, the whole family originated from, I think it was Brussels, but there's nobody there now. No, they all moved to Paris at the time.
Because I was born in Antwerp, and I just wondered if I knew maybe, or my parents knew maybe.
Well, the family name, as you may have seen, was Fox. There were a lot of Fox brothers.
Yes, I think I know, one of my friends in school was called. Okay,
No, they were not. I don't know. I think they moved to Paris. I don't know at what time, because I was never able to ask any of those questions. So I don't really know. I'm sorry, I don't know there.
So thanks, Annick. It was wonderful.
You're welcome.
Okay, Malcolm's got a question for you.
Right.
Yes. Hi, Annick. Thank you for your story. One thing puzzled me. You didn't know you were Jewish till you were 17. Why then, when you were 11, when you were attacked by the boys, did they call you dirty Jew?
Okay.
I know you were Jewish.
I tell you, because in the little town where I was brought up, it was obvious everybody knew my story, but nobody used to tell me, but they all knew my story. I realized afterwards. In fact, I have a cousin, again, a niece of Mimi, but I consider all her family as my family. So I refer to her as a cousin, who told me a few years ago that when we were at school, she was at school with me, sometimes she used to defend me, because there were people saying, unpleasant, girls saying unpleasant things. But I never was told. I had no idea. I even had to I went to church. And for me, I didn't know anything different.
That makes it even worse. Makes your story even sadder.
Yeah, but listen, I came back into the fold, so I think that's the most important, really.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Has anybody questions? Well, it doesn't seem that there are any more questions. I think you
Okay.
covered it all
No,
very
not very
well.
inspiring.
Oh no, it was fascinating. Oh, hold on. I think we might have another question. Eric, have you got a question?
You need to unmute.
You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
We've been to Amsterdam several times, and we went to the Anne Frank's Museum. Before your conversation today, I didn't know that there were many people hiding from the Nazis in Amsterdam. Is there any records of how many people survived hiding in cellars and roofs and things like that? I thought Anne Frank's was a one-off.
No. I think they were. I could not tell you. I mean, I know that the my uncle, I was always told because that they were hiding only, I think, a few doors from them. It was somebody my uncle knew through business, and they built a false stairs, double staircase, if you like. But that's all I know. I like you. I read stories about it, but I don't know the numbers. I don't know. I'm sure there were others because I've read quite a few things, and not only in Amsterdam, but in Holland, quite a few people, thank God, also were hidden. But how, I don't know. How many, I couldn't tell you. Don't they tell this in the museum? Don't they mention something about that?
I mean, I think we went about 35 years ago when we first got married.
Okay.
Excuse me. Can I just say something? My son-in-law, his whole family were sheltered somewhere in Belgium. They were all in hiding, and they all got together after the war. There were hundreds and hundreds of people in hiding.
Yeah, you are.
Really?
Yeah.
They were.
I think that they were, thank God, quite a few people were in hiding, that's for sure. But how many will we ever know? Will we ever know? Like I always hear, and I'm always told, and I do react to that. I know, especially in this country, a lot of people think that are racist, not anti-Semitic, the French are. But I always refer, and I'm sure you've heard of that person, she's passed away now, called Simone Weil. She became, she went into politics. She was taken with her sister, her mother, well, the whole family. And she survived, so did her sister, unfortunately not the mother. And she wrote a book, I've got her book of her life. And in the book, she said that she also react to the fact that people always think that French are so anti-Semitic. She said that one never talks about the silent majority, she says in her book. And it's true, because people, like Mimi, there are a lot of people like that who never said anything afterwards, who did a lot and never talked about it. There were a lot of not very pleasant ones, unfortunately, but there were a lot of people helping and never wanted to talk about it. So, I mean, there's an old village in France who helped to hide Jewish children, a whole village. And there's a book about it as well. And I had them eventually send them to Switzerland. So there was a lot going on, which is being ignored. I know people don't want to know, they don't want to talk about it anymore, or they're not there anymore. But anyway, but I'm pleased that you say that in Belgium, there were so many who managed to, be, it's wonderful to hear that, really wonderful.
Mrs. Berkovich has got.
Thank
got
you.
A question.
What a title. I just want to thank Annick. I agree with everybody in Bristol. The talk was fascinating, and it was nice to see you and Alan, and hope you're all keeping well. Sam and Sonia Silverman have been listening to this as well. So your story is
really?
around. Yeah.
In Brighton.
No, Sam and Sonia live in Barnet.
Sam and sorry.
Yes.
I mean, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
They've been listening. So they've heard your story.
I have to tell you something. When you deliver a story like that, the way we do it with Zoom is not quite the same, because you cannot sense the people, you cannot see the people. So the atmosphere may not be quite the same. It's a lot more difficult to deliver like that.
Yes.
But, I hope you know.
We were looking forward to actually meeting you when you came to Bushy. You could have come here first, but
one day,
circumstances, one day. Okay, it was fascinating.
Thank you very much, Irene. Thank you.
Let's thank Irene for recommending you to us, because it was through her that we got in touch.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much, because it's been fascinating. And I have to tell you, you wanted to know how many. We did have 80 log-ons, which means that there was somewhere in the region of 120, I reckon 150 people on today. So you did very, very well.
Because
thank you very, very much.
I mean, the point, I don't know if you're aware, I really do that in schools a lot, because I feel that it's my duty to tell the children. So every year, I mean, before the lockdown arrived, I did go to quite a few. So I had a lot of booking, but unfortunately had to be cancelled. Because we have to educate the children. I mean, it's lovely to speak to a group like yours, but you know already quite a lot about it. But the children have to know, and that's what I do. And I find it is my duty to do it.
As much as we know, you always have. It seems that we always learn something else. So our strategy is it's never too late to learn, and we certainly learned. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Daphne. Thank you for asking me as well. I appreciate it.
Thank
you.
Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.